California's Shasta Lake is drying up, and here's a number that will absolutely terrify you. 40 million people depend on a single reservoir that, in 2021, dropped to just 24% of its capacity. Not a lake in some remote corner of Nevada. Not a pond. We're talking about California's largest reservoir by storage capacity, 24% full. That's the bathtub ring so visible and so stark that it was photographed from space by NASA satellites. That's the moment when an entire state's water security teetered on the absolute edge of collapse. Shasta Lake is the crown jewel of the entire California water system, controlling flows to farms that feed America, hydropower that supplies millions of homes with electricity, and the last hope for a nearly extinct salmon species fighting to survive in warm, dying rivers. But here's what they didn't tell you when the news cycle moved on to the next disaster. This wasn't a one-time crisis that ended when the rain came back. This was a preview of what's coming, a system pushed past its design limits, a warning sign written in minerals and exposed rock, and the decisions being made right now about raising the dam, about cutting water to 40 million residents, about sacrificing salmon to save farms, will determine whether California survives the next drought, or whether the American West enters a new era of permanent water scarcity, where rationing becomes normal and crisis becomes baseline. Stick around. Most people have no idea, honestly, almost nobody has any idea how fragile California's water system actually is. They turn on the tap in their kitchen, water comes out. They shower, they wash their car, they water their lawn, and they assume it always will. That assumption sits on top of a foundation of concrete and steel built nearly 80 years ago. Shasta Dam was completed in 1945 by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, and when it was built, it was a marvel of American engineering. A concrete giant standing 738 feet tall, taller than most office buildings. It dams up 4 major rivers, the Sacramento, the Pitt, the McCloud, and Squaw Creek, and creates a lake that stretches 370 miles up into the mountains of Northern California. The reservoir it creates is named Shasta Lake. At full capacity, Shasta Lake holds 4.5 million acre-feet of water. Stop for a second and actually absorb what that number means. An acre-foot is the amount of water needed to cover 1 acre of land with water 1 foot deep, so 4.5 million of them. If you somehow drained the entire lake into Olympic-sized swimming pools, you would fill 1.8 million of them, not 100,000, not 500,000, 1.8 million Olympic pools. That's the actual scale of this one single reservoir. That's the volume we're talking about. And in 2021, when the drought hit hard, that unimaginable volume of water dropped to exactly 24% of capacity. The lake that should have been sparkling blue turned into something from a nightmare, a massive drained bathtub covered in exposed rock and dust. A pale, ghostly mineral ring marked the waterline where the water used to reach, created by calcium deposits and mineral compounds from the water that had attached themselves to the stone over decades. That pale ring wasn't some abstract environmental symbol you could ignore. It was visible from satellites 400 miles above Earth. It was a warning sign written in minerals and stone. And when you looked at the photos, when you saw the scale of that ring, you understood something fundamental. Nobody was paying attention until the whole system started to crack. Nobody was ready. The 2021 drought didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a sudden shock that came from nowhere. It was part of a weather pattern that had been building and intensifying for years. California had already endured a brutal historic drought from 2012 to 2016, a full 5 consecutive years of below normal precipitation and reduced snowpack in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Just when the state thought it could finally breathe again, when reservoirs started to recover and farmers could plan for a normal water year, a second mega-drought struck between 2020 and 2022. This time it was different. This time it was more severe. This time it felt personal. Scientists studying the snowpack in the Sierra Nevada, the mountain range that feeds Shasta Lake with snowmelt every spring, found something shocking. The snowpack levels were not just low. They were at levels not seen in 500 years. A 500-year event. Think about that for a second. That means nobody alive on Earth had experienced snow levels this low. No farmer who had been working the land for 50 years. No engineer who had designed water systems for decades. No water official. No one. The rivers that usually roared with meltwater in April and May came trickling in like leaky faucets. The snowpack that was supposed to buffer the state through hot summers was gone. And Shasta, the reservoir that's supposed to absorb these kinds of extremes and balance them out, started draining like someone had pulled a plug in the bottom. The lake level fell month after month. By August 2021, Shasta had fallen to 38% of capacity. By September, just 1 month later, it was at 26%. The lake was shrinking in real time. People could watch it on websites that tracked the elevation minute by minute. The ripple effects started spreading across an entire state like cracks in a concrete dam. Water deliveries to farms got slashed without warning. Farmers woke up to phone calls telling them their water allocation was cut in half. Cities had to issue emergency rationing orders. Water agencies started raising rates to discourage usage. Restrictions on lawn watering and car washing went into effect. And then came the announcement in October 2021 that would fundamentally change how 40 million Californians thought about water. Mandatory water cuts were coming. Not a request, not a suggestion, not a recommendation, a command from the state's highest authorities. Here's where this story becomes insane. Shasta Lake doesn't just supply water to Southern California suburbs or San Francisco. The reservoir feeds the Central Valley Project, an enormous system of dams, canals, pumping stations, and distribution networks that stretches across California's Central Valley. This valley is the agricultural heartland, not just of California, but of America. It produces a quarter of all the food eaten in the United States. A quarter. 1 out of every 4 meals in an American grocery store comes from California's Central Valley. It produces 1/3 of America's vegetables: lettuce, strawberries, almonds, cotton, peaches, tomatoes, carrots, broccoli. All of it depends on irrigation water that ultimately flows from Shasta Lake through the Central Valley Project. When Shasta drops, when the lake level falls below a critical threshold, those farms get less water. Farmers have to leave fields dry. Crops don't get planted. And across a nation that depends on California's farms, prices start to rise. Lettuce prices go up. Food prices go up. Grocery bills go up. But here's the secondary shock. Hydropower. Shasta Lake generates electricity. When Shasta is at full capacity, the dam's turbines can generate 676 megawatts of power. That's enough to power around 600,000 homes. It's a backup generation source for California's grid. At 24% capacity, those turbines spin slowly. Power generation plummets to a fraction of normal output. California has to rely on other power plants, natural gas plants mostly, or buy power from neighboring states at premium prices. Rolling blackouts become possible. And blackouts aren't just an inconvenience in California. They mean hospitals running on backup generators, traffic lights going out, and people in their homes losing air conditioning during heat waves in 110-degree heat. They're a sign that the infrastructure supporting 40 million people is collapsing in slow motion, and the dominoes keep falling in ways nobody predicted. The Sacramento River, the river that flows out of Shasta Dam, is also home to the winter-run Chinook salmon, one of the most endangered and at-risk species in America. These fish are trapped between two worlds. Shasta Dam was built in 1945 and completely blocked the salmon from reaching their ancestral spawning grounds in the cold, high-elevation streams of the McCloud River. For over 80 years, they've been trapped downstream. Now, they're forced to spawn in the Sacramento River, below the dam, where temperatures naturally run warmer. When Shasta's water level is high, when the reservoir is full, the dam can release cold water from the deep depths of the lake. That cold water keeps the Sacramento River cool enough for salmon eggs to survive. But when Shasta drops low, when the reservoir shrinks to 24%, there's no cold water down there. The cold water is gone. The dam can't release what doesn't exist. The river warms up. Water temperatures climb into the 70s and even higher on hot days. And salmon eggs incubating in the gravel don't survive warm water. They just cook. They die. Federal scientists documented what happened during the 2012 to 2016 drought. Between 95 and 98% of winter-run Chinook eggs died. Not most of them. Not 50%. 95 to 98%. The species was being slowly killed by warm water. The salmon that somehow made it, the ones that were born downstream in a rare good year, would swim back to spawn years later, and they'd encounter the same warm river that killed their parents. It was a cycle of extinction in slow motion, a species dying because of what we built. In 2022, when the drought was finally loosening its grip, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Winnemem-Wintu tribe, and federal fisheries agencies tried something bold, something hopeful. They collected endangered salmon eggs from a hatchery below Lake Shasta and relocated them to the cold, spring-fed McCloud River upstream, the place where Chinook had spawned for thousands of years before the dam blocked them. For the first time in over 80 years, salmon returned to their ancestral river. They swam in the McCloud. Young salmon were born there. It was a moment of hope, a reversal of the extinction trajectory. But in 2026, the state cut funding for the project. The tribal grant set to end this year. The salmon would be cut off from the river again. The reversal wouldn't last. The cycle would continue, and the salmon would keep dying. The mandatory water cuts started rolling out in 2024 as a permanent reality, not a temporary emergency measure that would disappear when the drought ended. For the first time in California's entire history, and California has been fighting water scarcity for 150 years, the state's largest water utilities, the ones serving 95% of the population, were forced by the California State Water Resources Control Board to cut the amount of water they deliver. The target: up to 40% reduction by the year 2040. 40%. Think about what that means. If you use 100 gallons of water today, in 2040, you might only get 60. Think about your showers, your lawn, your pool, the water it takes to produce the food you eat. Some regions would feel this more than others. The Desert Water Agency serving Palm Springs and the Coachella Valley faced cuts of 32%. Inland cities, Bakersfield, Fresno, Kern County, places where summer temperatures hit 110 degrees Fahrenheit and people have air conditioners running for 6 months straight, these cities were hit hardest. These are the places where people actually need more water, not less. And yet the mandate was coming whether they liked it or not. The State Water Resources Control Board had made the decision. Water suppliers could respond 3 ways: mandate restrictions on residents, limiting lawn watering, limiting pool filling, limiting car washing, limiting outdoor water use. Raise rates to make people use less water through their wallet. Or install low-flow appliances and fixtures in homes and businesses. Most suppliers did all 3. Restrictions went into effect. Rates climbed. Showerheads got replaced. Toilets got replaced. By January 2025, the new rules were live and in effect. The cuts were designed to deliver about 500,000 acre-feet of water savings annually by 2040. Enough to supply 1.4 million households for an entire year. Enough to fill 600,000 Olympic pools. But here's the brutal math that nobody wanted to say out loud. If Shasta doesn't refill, if we get another multi-year drought, those water savings won't matter. They won't replace what's being lost. The cuts weren't a solution. They were a band-aid on a patient who was hemorrhaging. Cutting water is a stall tactic, not a cure. And by the way, thanks to our monthly hoodie giveaway, one person watching right now is about to get free merch. Limited edition, B.E. Rob's Ice Hoodie. Drop a comment below, hit the like button, and you might wake up tomorrow with that hoodie headed to your address. Giveaway ends in 72 hours. So what was the actual solution? How do you fix a system this broken? How do you build back a water supply when climate and precipitation have become unpredictable? The Bureau of Reclamation had a proposal. It was called the Shasta Dam Raise. The plan was to raise the existing dam by 18.5 feet. Cost $1.8 billion of taxpayer money. Benefit: the project would give farms an additional 51,300 acre-feet of water per year. That sounds huge. It sounds like it would solve everything, until you do the actual math. 51,300 acre-feet per year is less than 1% more water. Less than 1%, on average, for $1.8 billion, for generations of environmental impact. But here's what would be far more than 1%, the damage. Raising the dam would require flooding the McCloud River, one of California's last free-flowing rivers protected under California's Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, which means the project is technically illegal under state law. The state won't allow it. The courts won't allow it. But that doesn't mean it's not being pushed. Raising the dam would also flood the Kabyai Creek burial ground, where dozens of Winnemem Wintu tribal members were buried after the 1854 massacre. Sacred sites would vanish underwater. Salmon habitat would shrink even more, pushing the winter-run Chinook closer to extinction. The project sat in political limbo for years, opposed by environmental groups, opposed by the tribes, opposed even by members of Congress who called it wasteful and illegal. Then in 2025, everything changed. The Trump administration allocated $40 million in federal funds specifically for planning and pre-construction of the Shasta Dam Raise. The dam raise wasn't dead. It was being revived. It was being funded. And nobody who would be affected by it, the tribes, the salmon, the communities downstream, had agreed to it. But here's what makes this whole situation even more complicated. Here's what makes you realize that no single solution will work. In 2023, just 2 years after Shasta hit 24% capacity, California got pounded by consecutive wet winters. The storms came one after another. Atmospheric rivers, precipitation records fell, and the snowpack returned to the Sierra Nevada. The reservoirs filled like a switch had been flipped. By May 2024, Shasta was at 96% of capacity, so full that officials called it too high and increased water releases to prevent flooding and dam failure. The water was spilling over the top. The recovery was so dramatic, so unexpected, that by early 2025, Shasta began the year at the highest water levels in 15 years. The bathtub ring disappeared completely. The pale mineral mark that had been visible from space was gone. The Ghost Bridge, the Pitt River Bridge, which had been exposed and vulnerable at 32% capacity, was submerged again under feet of water. The drought that looked permanent had ended, and California had 15 months of relief. Farmers were watering again. Cities lifted their restrictions. Water agencies scaled back their conservation measures. People started taking long showers again. But this is the trap. This is the pattern that no amount of dam raising can fix. California's water cycle has become violently unstable. Boom, bust, boom, bust. A system designed in the 1940s to manage water as if it were stable and predictable is now facing the opposite, increasing volatility. Droughts and rainfall are becoming more extreme. Snowpack is arriving later and melting earlier in the year, and climate change is the engine running the whole thing, accelerating towards something worse. Scientists have studied tree rings, ice cores, and weather records stretching back 1,200 years. The wet and dry cycles we're seeing now are among the most dramatic in over 1,000 years of recorded history. And they're not stabilizing, they're accelerating. The volatility is increasing year after year. Climate models suggest that as the atmosphere warms due to greenhouse gas emissions, precipitation becomes more intense when it comes, but comes less frequently overall. You get drought years that are drier and last longer. You get wet years that are wetter and more extreme. But the transition between them is sharper, unpredictable, chaotic. The water system can't handle that kind of volatility. Dams are designed assuming a certain range of normal variation, a predictable cycle of wet and dry. When variation goes beyond that historical range, when the cycle breaks and becomes erratic, the system breaks, or it teeters on the edge of breaking. The real crisis isn't that Shasta went to 24% in 2021. The real crisis is that Shasta might do it again, and next time we might not get lucky with back-to-back wet years to recover in time. The state water authorities know this. The Bureau of Reclamation knows this. The farms know this. The tribes know this. And that's why every decision being made right now is a BET. A beat on what the climate will be. A BT on how wet or dry the future will be. Whether to raise the dam, whether to cut water to cities and accept reduced living standards, whether to sacrifice salmon or sacrifice farms, whether to build new reservoirs or accept permanent scarcity, whether to relocate people away from the desert or dig deeper wells and drain aquifers. These are the bets. And nobody actually knows how wet or dry it will be. The climate models disagree, the scientists debate, the politicians hedge. We have 15 years of water cuts, starting in 2025, designed to save enough water to get through the next mega drought, to have reserves in case the drought lasts longer than 2021. But if the next drought is worse, if snowpack falls even lower, if the volatility keeps escalating, if we get back-to-back droughts instead of the pattern we've seen, then cutting 40% of water delivery won't be enough. We'll be short. We'll be forced to choose between feeding farms or supplying cities, between saving a species or irrigating a region, between rationing water or going without, between having water to drink or water to grow food, between survival and collapse. That's the choice. That's what's coming. California is one mega drought away from a crisis that makes 2021 look like a dry summer. And the machines grinding away at the state's water system, the dams, the pumps, the reservoirs, the canals, were built for a climate and a water cycle that no longer exists. They were built for the 1940s climate, not for 2026, not for 2040, not for what comes after. Here's the truth that scares water engineers most. We're not designing our way out of this. We're not inventing a solution. We're not building our way to abundance. We're surviving drought to drought, hoping the wet years come fast enough to refill our tanks before the dry years drain them again. Betting on luck, hoping for mercy from the climate. And if that bet goes wrong, if we get back-to-back droughts, if we get a mega drought that lasts longer than the capacity of the entire system to handle, then the American West doesn't dry up in stages. It doesn't slowly ration water over decades. It tips. Everything changes at once. Water wars between states. Farming collapses. Cities depopulate. Species go extinct. The power grid fails. And the most powerful agricultural region on Earth becomes a dust bowl. Download our free 72 Hours Disaster Guide using the link in the description below, because if this story reminds you how quickly the things we take for granted can disappear, you might want to know what to do when the water stops flowing, what to store, what to know, how to survive. Thanks for watching.